Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
Were there any lingering thoughts about the second paragraph of the Shema that maybe we cut off, that people didn't get a chance to express last time? Group reward and punishment, the reigns, I'm bringing it all back to you. It's still all relevant since we just started praying for rain on Shmini Atzeret.
I think this is, maybe sort of a trivial question, but we all know, and you pointed out that in the second paragraph, some of the verbs are plural and some are not. Most of them are plural. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, whether there's a reason, an underlying reason why the ones that are singular, why those are the exceptions.
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. As far as I can tell, the only ones that are singular is B'shivtecha b'veitecha v'lechtecha v'derech uv'shach kumecha. I think that's the only ones that are singular, which makes it sound as if it is a line directly lifted from the first paragraph of the Shema, which is an earlier passage in Sefer Dvarim and Deuteronomy.
Right.
I don't know. You could make up a midrash about that. It's still the individual. This is what we're saying this to the group, but it's still dependent on every individual, doing these things when they lie down and when they rise up and in your homes and in your gates. It's a commandment that's a nice midrash. It's a commandment to the whole, and the reward of the punishment are going to be to the whole people, but it's still dependent on every single individual doing their duty. How about that, Ilana?
Sure.
That's a nice sermon. Okay.
Yeah, the relationship of the one to the whole.
Because the individual to the community, it's incumbent on the whole community, but if every individual doesn't do their part, then this won't work. Vered?
Also, in the third line, there's some verbs in single form, natati.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
You're correct. Thank you. Right. So again, this is going to befall every single individual. Don't think you're going to escape, which is a segue to what I wanted to share. I was reading a passage in the Zohar I'll get back to you, Larry, sorry. Passage in the Zohar for Parshat Noach. I have to give a little bit of backstory to this. So the passage talks about the opening of the Parsha, not this week, but next week. Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. He was a righteous man in his generation, and you're probably familiar with the argument about what does that mean. He was righteous in his generation. So the interpreters debate. Some say what that means is, well, for his generation, which was totally wicked, he was righteous. But had he been in a righteous generation like Abraham's generation, then he would have been no big deal. The other opinion being, it means, no, he managed to be righteous even in his awful generation. And had he been in a greater generation like Abraham's generation, he would have been even more righteous. Okay, so two different interpretations going in two different directions about, is this a knock on Noah or is it a praise of Noah? And then the Zohar goes on to talk about, well, if Noah was such a tzaddik, why couldn't he save his generation? For example, the Zohar says, when God wanted to destroy all of Bnei Israel because of the sin of the golden calf, and said to Moses, I'm going to save you alone. We'll start out from fresh. I'll make you into a whole new nation, and I'll just kill the rest of them. Moses, who could have been saved, like Noah was saved, chooses to argue with God and says, forget it. If you're gonna kill them, then take me also. The deal is off, right? Why didn't Noah say that? Why didn't Noah? And by the way, and then Moshe, of course, we know is able to win God's submission and get God to forgive Bnei Israel. So, for example, why didn't Noah say, forget it, I'm not going to the ark. You can take me also, or spare everyone. Why didn't he do what Moses did? So the answer to that is because Moshe, if you remember that passage which we read on fast days near the end of Exodus, we just read it on Tzom Gedalia, the fast of Gedalia, the day after Rosh Hashanah. Moshe says, Zechor la'Avraham li'Yitzchak u'Yisrael avadecha. Remember, so Moses brings up the merit of the ancestors to say to God, don't kill them. Remember what you promised to the ancestors. And Noah has no such righteous ancestors to call upon, whose merit he can call upon. So therefore, Noah couldn't have pulled that trick. Okay. How about Abraham, who argued with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Well, Abraham realized, the Zohar says, that the minimum standard for righteousness for saving the whole group was how many people? 10. And the Zohar says, and there was Noah and his 3 sons and their wives. And that didn't make 10. It made 8. It was very interesting to me, by the way, that the passage actually mentioned the wives, because in our patriarchal tradition, the wives are usually ignored, right? So that would have been only 8 and not 10. So Noah knew that he couldn't pull the gambit. I said trick, but that's not what I meant. The gambit that Abraham did in arguing on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, because he knew he didn't have a full minion of righteous people. He only had 8, so he wouldn't have been able to save the generation. So there's nothing Noah could do to save the generation. That is why he went into the ark. All of this is just backstory to the point that I want to get to, that I found interesting. And it says that God commands Noah to go into the ark because the flood is going to start, and that Noah essentially has to hide in the ark. Otherwise, he is going to die. His righteousness will not save him unless he is protected within the ark. And then the Zohar quotes a passage from the Talmud which says, because when there is a plague in the land, it sweeps away the wicked and the righteous alike. Meaning, when there is something that is something that is a communal or group disaster. And I think what Vayim Shamoah is talking about would fall under this category, right? So whether it's the climate, which seems pretty relevant, or the plague, which seems pretty relevant, okay? The Talmud says, once Hashem unleashes the mashchit, the destroyer, then it sweeps away everything in its path. And it doesn't matter if you were righteous or not. Meaning there are certain sorts of disasters that when they befall humanity, although, again, befalling is taking it out of God's hands. V'hayim Shemar would say, once God sends it, then the fact that you were righteous doesn't save you and means nothing. So this really brings home that the idea of reward and punishment in this second paragraph of the Shema is really about the group and not about the individual. Even the righteous individual can suffer the same fate when the destroyer is unleashed. And then the Zohar cites another passage in the Torah where you have to be protected or the destroyer is going to get you. Can anyone think of what that passage is? What other passage where God says you're going to need to hide if you want to survive? I'll give you a hint. It's in the second book of the Bible. I'll give you another hint. Pesach. When, Meyer? Meyer got without a second hint.
Sorry. Thank you for the hint.
No, good.
When the Melech HaMavet comes over the house and you have to put the blood
right.
in your door.
Right. The slaying of the firstborn, right? It says, Ish lo yetzeh mi petach beito ad boker. Every person has to stay in their house until morning, meaning once the destroyer is unleashed, which of course, because I'm of a certain age, I envision it to be, tell me if anyone, raise your hand if you envision it to be this way also, curly green smoke snaking through the the land of Egypt from the movie The Ten Commandments. So that's how I imagine the Malach HaMavet. It's the wisps of green smoke, right, wafting through the camp. So Hashem says, you got to mark your doorposts and you must stay indoors all night. Meaning, if there are innocent Israelites who go out of their houses, they're going to be killed also by the Malach HaMavet, or at least their firstborn anyway, right? So once God unleashes the Mashchit, the destroyer, and again, I think this is sort of a way of understanding. I bring all this up because I think it's a way of understanding the doctrine of consequences of V'haya im Shamoah, which basically says this has nothing to do with the idea of reward or punishment for the individual. Okay? There are certain kinds of Vayim Shema would call them natural, what we call natural catastrophes, weather, plague. I mean, these are things, again, that we're totally living with today, okay? That once the mashchit, once the destroyer is abroad in the land, once God, I'm going to put this part in quotes, because this is the part that where I'm not a concrete literalist, okay? So I'm going to put it in air quotes. Once God releases the destroyer, okay, which is to say, once the consequence is coming, then it comes to righteous and wicked alike, right? Just because you're a good person doesn't mean you'll be immune to coronavirus. And just because you're a good person doesn't mean your house isn't going to burn down in the forest fires, or your house isn't going to be destroyed in the hurricanes in the southeast, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? There's certain kinds of disasters which Vayim Shema refers to as punishments, okay, that sweep away everyone in their path. And this is where the doctrine of individual goodness and individual reward and punishment is irrelevant. Okay? Noah would have drowned in the flood had he not hidden in the ark. Bnei Israel would have been, firstborn might have been killed had they strayed out of their house, right? The punishment, once it's a group consequence, takes everyone. Sorry, that's pretty dark. Mm-hmm. But I just wanted to share that. Again, I thought that passage in the Zohar is kind of a nice amplification of this. And again, it goes back to, by the way, the saying in the Talmud is, when the plague is abroad, don't walk in the middle of the road. That's the quote, right? Which sort of means stay home, wear your mask, and protect yourself, right? Because they had an awareness that there were certain things, such as plagues, right? Or in the Talmud when it's talking about it, or such as drought and famine in the second paragraph of the Shema in Deuteronomy. It was clearly aware to them that there are certain things that happen where this affects everyone. It has nothing to do with whether you were a good person or not. You as an individual were a good person or not. Ilana. Oh, sorry. Larry had his hand up, then Ilana.
I was just going back to your invitation for other comments about the paragraph. I'll be very brief. I think we mentioned this a little bit. It's been taken on by Jewish environmental groups as a call to environmentalism.
Yeah.
It's the paragraph is in Parshat Ekev, as we said. A year and a half ago, or maybe almost two, can't remember the date, I gave a Dvar Torah on the Library Minyan about that. There's a prayer by Arthur Waskow called A Prayer in Time of Planetary Danger, which is a adaptation of that entire paragraph. If anybody wants to see it, I'll be happy to send it to them by email.
Great. Send Larry an email, larryjerusalem@gmail.com. Was that it? Larry Jerusalem? No numbers?
You got it.
Send him an email, larryjerusalem@gmail.com. Thank you. Ilana.
So if we wanted to send you a letter and you were in Jerusalem, we could just say, Larry, Jerusalem.
And the post person would know exactly where to send
sort of
it.
like Santa Claus, North Pole.
Exactly.
Sorry, wrong religion. So my point, I think maybe connects with what Larry was getting at. I'm saying without having any idea what he said in his Dvar. But the wording that of talking about these disasters as God has unleashed such and such disaster. Well, I have trouble these days with the expression natural disaster even. I mean, is it partly? Is it even at all? So then, I think then we get into sort of the idea of where, yes, it affects good, bad, everyone equally, but how does it come about? Is it a failure of collective responsibility? And so there you get back into that notion that we've been talking about.
Yes. You're saying it as a question. I'm not going to answer that question.
Yeah.
Because you're raising a kind of a question of how it happens, and part of that is about theology and what your theology is, right?
But don't you think I think it's partly because of our understanding of what's happening in the world, in part at least, to human actions, human neglect, or even abuse, in my view, of God's creation, that some of these natural disasters are made much worse, and in some cases maybe even brought about that way. So I don't think of it as just theological, but maybe that's because I'm not.
Well, sorry, it is theological in the sense of, if you want to ask the question, where is God in this? So again, in the Bible, let us be candid. In Deuteronomy's theology, okay, in Deuteronomy's theology, as expressed in this passage, again, I don't want to lose the shot.
Yeah.
I want we're people of faith. Faith, one definition of faith is how you live with tradition. But I want to be honest about kind of the origin tradition, in the sense that the doctrine in this paragraph clearly is, it's because you strayed after other gods, and so God will be angry and send you this punishment. So the human involvement is because you strayed after your eyes and led you to worship other gods.
Right.
Okay. Now, hold on, Larry. Now we can interpret that as you can interpret that broadly, right? Like the other gods of, strip mining and fracking and overbuilding and not repairing the levees and all manner of...
Or very broadly speaking, the God of self.
Okay, the God of self, all sorts of other things. And I'm not saying that that's incorrect. I'm just saying I don't think that's what the author of Dvarim exactly had in mind.
Yes.
But because of this, I'll come to you in a second, Larry. Because of this, I just want to come to a point that I made near the beginning of talking about this paragraph, which is there are more liberal Jewish traditions, like in the Reform prayer book, or Reconstructionist, which eliminates it, Reconstructionist, which provides alternatives, which says, well, we don't want to say this paragraph because we don't believe in this anymore. That's the idea behind it. And I actually think, there are certainly ways of understanding this paragraph that make it pretty close to compatible with all sorts of contemporary views that we're discussing. They're kind of expansive midrashic views of this doctrine that allow me, for one, right, to say, I don't feel any need to swap out this paragraph of the Shema for some other alternative. In fact, Adarabah, the opposite, in our times of plague and climate change, I find it particularly apt and relevant. Right. I think it can speak to us very, very incisively. So I don't see the need of like, oh, this is a backward doctrine of all the punishments come from God, and we don't believe that anymore, and so we don't want to say this is part of our Shema, right? This was dropped by the Reform movement in the 1800s, as far as I know, right, as part of the Shema. By the way, I don't know that for a fact. I know it's not in the contemporary Reform Siddur, and I don't honestly know when it was dropped. So I just blew that out of my rear, that fact. I don't quite know when it was dropped. We can look that up. Okay, Larry.
I want to support you entirely, but I only want to mention it's because of the penury of English. We don't read these first two paragraphs right. The first paragraph is you individual. You've said it before. And the second paragraph, you have to read it however you interpret it as y'all.
Yes.
Collective. So
right.
So think about the collectivity, however, in whatever direction you go.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So I want to summarize it then as second paragraph of the Shema means if y'all don't follow the right path, disaster will ensue for y'all.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you said to me, what does the second paragraph of the Shema mean? Say it in one sentence. In one sentence, it means God is saying, I have told you what the good path is. And if you all don't follow it, there will be calamitous consequences for you as a group. Footnote from the Talmud and the Zohar, where it won't matter how good an individual you were. That won't protect you. Meyer.
I just want to actually reiterate something you said before, which I really liked. And I'm going to read from Akev that comes right before by Hayim Shema Tishmu.
In Deuteronomy. Thank you, Meyer. Go ahead. Yeah.
For the land to which you come to possess it, it is not like the land of Egypt that you left, where you would plant your seed and water it on foot like a vegetable garden. But the land to which you cross over to possess it is a land of mountains and valleys. From the rain of heaven it drinks water, a land that Hashem your God seeks out. The eyes of Hashem your God are always upon it from the beginning of the year to year's end. And then Vayayim Shemoah. The point being, I think that it's a call to action, I think, as much as anything else also. It's not just a call to belief in the sense that if we don't take the action that's required to sow the crops, to be aware of the fact that the water is not just going to be there, and we do it in a responsible way, I would add sort of a modern sort of interpretation of this, then disaster will befall us. So I do think that, and this is, again, following something you had suggested weeks ago, that there is our hand in here, which is also why I think Vayayim Shema is spoken to us communally and not just individually.
Good. Thank you. Right. And what I said at the beginning of this about that surrounding passage is Moshe saying, hey, back in Egypt, the crops grow every year because of this process, which seems to be automatic, which Larry has informed me does not have anything to do with the snows of Kilimanjaro, which are nowhere near the sources of the Nile, but rather rain in the mountains down in Sudan and Ethiopia, right? Which Moshe probably didn't know about. So he's saying, look, in Egypt, the Nile just, I'm going to put it in quotes, magically, automatically rises every year. You don't have to do anything. All you have to do is you have to dig canals a mile or two out from the Nile so that the water can spread out and water things. Okay. It seems automatic, right? Which of course we know it actually wasn't. All right. It's still dependent on rains, but it seemed automatic. We're going to go to a place where actually our whole subsistence and existence depends on changes that can happen from year to year. And if things don't go well, we'll starve and die. And he is saying this is based on what's going to happen is going to be based on how we fulfill our communal responsibilities as laid out for us by God. Marshall.
So where Ilana used the term natural disasters, I want to take the word natural, not make it an adjective, but make it a noun of nature, because I think of natural versus unnatural. So I say that disasters occur in nature, and as a result of that, what is our responsibility towards that? And maybe that's responsibilities. How do I respond to such?
Okay, good. Thank you. We should change it to say unnatural disasters of nature, perhaps. Yeah. Sometimes unnatural disasters of nature.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on this? This is good. I feel like we've squeezed a lot of meaning out of the second paragraph of the Shema. Okay. Given the time, I think it would be prudent not to start the third paragraph. And we're going to take off next week for Rosh Chodesh and my trip to San Diego. And then we will resume the week after. And I think we're really, really done with the second paragraph of the Shema. We will start with the third paragraph of the Shema 2 weeks from today.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.